Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CJJA Behavioral Health Committee webinar. I am Wendy Faulkner, Assistant Executive Director of CJJA. Today's webinar explores how fetal alcohol syndrome may impact some of the youth in our facilities. I would like to thank all of you for taking time to participate in this webinar today, and special thanks to our committee co-chairs, Heidi Mueller, Director of Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, and Jennifer Jaworski, Chief of Mental Health, also with the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, who have put a great deal of work into the preparation of this webinar, as well as our presenters for today, who Heidi will introduce shortly. For those of you who might be new to CJJA, we are a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional and residential facilities, services, programs, and most importantly, long-term outcomes for youth and their families. At this point, I'm going to ask Charity to provide us with a few technical instructions before we start. Charity?
Hello, everyone. If you could please use the audio through your phone using your PIN number. Please make sure that you're muted. In the questions box, you can type questions at any time. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. The link to our audio recording and PowerPoint presentations will be sent following the webinar. And now I'm going to turn it over to Heidi Mueller, Director of Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us on this webinar. I appreciate everybody being here and am excited to hear more about this. As folks have said, this is something that impacts more of the youth in our custody than we realize. And I want to thank our presenters. I'm sorry. Can you still hear me? Okay, sorry, I'm having a little bit of technical issue here. I want to thank our presenters, Dr. Jennifer Jaworski, who is the Chief of Mental Health at the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, and Janet Wagner, who's a partner at Latimer, LeVay, and Phylock. They have put a lot of work into this presentation, and of course, I also have to always thank Dr. Jaworski for really keeping this, even though we are co-chairs, she really does all of the work. And I just want to thank her for continuing to move this committee forward and put all the work into to help us put together these great informative presentations. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the presenters, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation today.
Hi, this is Janet Wagner, and I am a mom. My daughter lives with fetal alcohol syndrome. She was diagnosed at the age of 3, I believe. I'm sorry, Charity?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Would you like me to help you with the slides?
Would you mind going back to the first slide? I think I advanced it a little too fast.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So my daughter was born in Russia to a birth mother who drank during pregnancy. I did not realize that she was affected when she first came home, but I had already brought my son home, who is not affected, from Russia, and knew that that Sasha's behaviors weren't quite right, and you know, there's that instinct that you have, nobody. She has the face of fetal alcohol syndrome, which we'll get to in a little bit, but nobody had diagnosed her. Her pediatrician didn't see it. No one else that in the health professions that we interacted with saw it. And so I was trying to work with this toddler with extreme behaviors, and then finally figured out what was going on and managed to get information, adjust my expectations and behaviors with her, and work with her that way. I was practicing law at a large national law firm, and was pretty darn happy there. When Sasha came home, I was not able to do that. I took a couple years off, worked with her, started practicing, went back for an advanced law degree in child and family law at Loyola University Chicago, focused on special ed, because that's also something that children in who are affected need. And while I still practice law, I don't practice. I'm not not doing child and family law. I practice business law, but I don't want any other parent or child to have to go through the experiences that we did. So I try to advocate, educate, and I am just so very pleased to have been asked to do this presentation today. So thank you very much, everybody. So FASD 101, what you need to know about it. My experience is that many people don't really understand it, and so I'm very happy to share with you what I have learned. It is 100% preventable. There's only one cause, and that is maternal drinking during pregnancy. Leading cause of mental retardation. It is organic brain and central nervous system damage, and it doesn't get repaired. It gets mitigated, but it does not get repaired. And I believe, I think Ann Stryska believes, I think anybody who is working in this area and has an understanding of fetal alcohol syndrome and understands the numbers of people affected would agree that it is nothing less than an epidemic. So this is my daughter. She was about 7 in the face of fetal alcohol syndrome. She really is my hero because she faces so much and she continues to move forward, and she is very brave. You'll see she's kind of scrawny. You're going to recognize the face in a moment, but nobody saw it until I went to a conference on parenting, of all things. It was first identified in 1972 by Kenneth Jones in the United States and Paul Lemoyne in France. All of the folk admonitions against drinking during pregnancy are based on this. I mean, from the time of Aristotle, it's been known that women should not drink while pregnant, and everybody has noticed that the children of the mothers who drank have been different, maybe don't have the intellectual capacity, etc. But it's known for a long time. It's just first been identified scientifically in 1972. So alcohol is a teratogen, and that's any substance, organism, or process, process that causes malformation in a fetus. Thalidomide, a teratogen, German measles, radiation, and alcohol is one. So 4 main things that can happen: death, of course, malformation, growth deficiencies, functional deficits. Alcohol is one that causes all. A mother who drinks excessively during pregnancy, the child may be stillborn, maybe a miscarriage, malformations. You know, there's the central nervous system damage. There are the children tend to be very sensitive in their extremities. They tend to be, they tend to have low weight. So, you know, the tall, the really skinny kid. And then sometimes growth deficiencies and functional deficits where they can't quite fit in. So brain damage, central nervous system damage, growth deficiencies, defects in major organs, heart defects are one, and I think that one is probably the major one. I know that after Sasha was diagnosed, we took her to a cardiologist to make sure that we weren't dealing with that as well. It is a disability. It's an invisible disability. It's not a psychiatric illness, but it is the brain is affected in a very physical way, and I will show you some slides coming up. The brain is smaller. It's missing some of the grooves and valleys that help brains function at a higher level. There are some mental health issues that are associated with it, but it's not, it's in and of itself, it is not really a psychiatric difference. It is a physical disability and a neurotoxin. So what it looks like, the head circumference is going to be small. I know that when we were in Russia and got Sasha's referral, usually you get the referral ahead of time, but this was very different. We measured her head, called a doctor at the University of Minnesota, who I'd worked with previously when my son came home, and he's an international adoption specialist. And she was, I think, 42.5 centimeters. He said, you know, I'd be concerned if it was less than 42. She just barely kind of made that cutoff. Her head should have been larger than it was. She never was the kid, you know, a lot of times babies and even toddlers, they're kind of bobbleheads. They've got these huge heads on these small bodies. Their heads are outsized. I think that the studies will show that the FAS kids aren't like that. Their head doesn't expand because their brain isn't that big. The nasal bridge is kind of lower and flatter to the face. Epicampal folds, they look like Asian people will have the epicampal fold. Sasha's is very prominent. The eye openings are smaller, and that's something that that a physician who knows to look for things like this will measure. Tends to have a shorter nose. The mid face is flat, and at certain angles, Sasha's face is flat, but it's not flat in the way that many Asian people have a flatter face. It is it's flat, and the cheekbones don't really puff out the cheeks. Thin upper lip, the philtrum, the groove underneath between the nose and the lip tends to be smaller. There is, again, physicians have a scale of 1 to 5 on the smoothness, and the jaw the jaw tends to be underdeveloped. And then, you know, just kind of going back, and you know, here you can kind of see in the picture to the left, you can kind of see the flatness of the face, you know, where her eye sockets are, down to her cheeks. It looks a little bit flatter. Let me go back for just one moment. Okay. You'll see that, you know, she's pretty thin. You can see that the philtrum is flattened. I don't know that you can really tell. Maybe in the lower right picture, you can tell a little bit that she's got the epicampal folds like my son has. But the face develops. It's a period of 3 days in pregnancy that the face develops, and so if you have the face, then you can diagnose the FAS definitively. If you can't, you're going to have to rely on self-reporting. But you know, there's a whole constellation of symptoms that happen. Obviously, a baby with the FAS face. The children generally charming, outgoing, friendly, agreeable, easy to please, funny, confabulators. They kind of tell stories. Many children are like that. I think that with Sasha, as opposed to some other children, it's a little bit more difficult to get past that outward appearance, the charming, outgoing, friendly appearance, and get her to relate a little bit more deeply. They can be very impulsive. I'm finding that now that she's 13 and a half, highly suggestible. Will admit to things that they didn't do. And we have had that in the course of various intake sessions. Sometimes she thinks that you want to hear something, and she will tell you that. And I think that in order to get past that, to overcome that, there needs to be an extraordinary trusting relationship. She will come back and tell me, you know, I told a lie, that really wasn't true. But she's not going to do that to a whole lot of other people. Executive function abilities. Every morning, I'm getting ready. I have to tell her, you need to do this, 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 and this. And I can't let her not do something or go on to the next thing until she's done something. It keeps us all in order that way. In school, it's been a real challenge in school for her because, again, nobody really understands this. And so the teachers who work with kids who are in special ed programs or have an IEP, they kind of get it, but not to this level, and low adaptive functioning. Mental retardation and learning disabilities. She has the trifecta of learning disabilities: dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. I think that that's not uncommon. Thankfully, she has a typical IQ, normal IQ, within normal range, even a little bit above average in some of the domains. Sensory integration and processing disorders. When she was younger, it was very, very difficult for her to find clothes because they're scratchy, they don't fit right. She couldn't get water splashed on her. It would result in a screaming fit. So there's a lot of behaviors that are just more extreme because they can't process internally. And that again is, you know, the brain is affected and they don't have the normal functioning of the brain. Sometimes comorbid mental illnesses, and I'm always on the lookout for bipolar or schizophrenia in her. It may be that her birth mother was dealing with things like that, but I think that the research points out that these things can be more typical. Poor social skills. She operates at, say, 2nd, 3rd grade level, and she's a 7th grader. So she tends to go with the younger kids because she can't keep up with the children who are her age and relate to them. Self-regulation, she goes from 0 to 60, more so when she was younger. If there was a transition, the transition was very, very difficult. Any transition, you know, we have to leave school to go get in the car. And I can't tell you how many times I had a kid under my arm, like a potatoes or, you know, sack of dog food, screaming her head off because she couldn't understand that we had to transition, and it was just so difficult. Time, money, consequences. Time is much easier now. Money, the money concepts at school, it took probably 3 years for her to understand how to count money, and that was a goal on her IEP for a good 3 years. She's much better at it now, and she's got a couple of side jobs, collecting a neighbor's mail and walking dogs, and she loves stuffing it away in the bank. Consequences are still a problem. You know, if you do this, you're going to have this consequence, and I don't think that she quite gets that all the time. So again, days 18 to 21. So there's a lot of other kids, people with FAS who are not diagnosed because they don't have the face, and maybe nobody is putting together the constellation of symptoms in order to give the diagnosis for them. The corpus callosum, and I know that this is the mental health committee, and so you are all much more familiar with this than I am, but it's affected, and so, you know, all the signals that have to go from one side of the brain to the other, because the corpus callosum is affected, it's much more difficult, and that causes a lot of the difficulties that that these people have in functioning and with brain functioning. Okay, so I had mentioned this previously, the brain of a normal baby versus the brain of a baby with FAS, and you can really see the stark contrast here. What kids with FAS are dealing with. They just simply don't have the brain that functions well for them. They're missing a lot of the parts. It's been called Swiss cheese brain. It causes things like one day they can remember something or can do something, the next day they can't. And as the slide says, if you can accept that they're missing brain cells, that they're just missing brain matter, that their behaviors aren't willful, but it's not can't or not won't, it's that they can't. And so the processing of information, the information that may be flooding at them in a setting where there's a lot going on, causes them to shut down. They can't process everything, and so they simply can't on a lot of times. So life and law, they're going to likely need special education services. And I will tell you that, you know, because special education law was one of my focuses at doing my LLM. If a child can get an IEP based on the FAS, I mean, that qualifies under other health impairment, or can get a report showing that they have learning disabilities and all of these in a significant way in order for them to qualify under the IDEA, then with respect to school discipline, so when they're acting out at school, it requires the district and the school to go through a manifestation determination meeting or hearing, where if it's determined that the behavior is the result or manifestation of their disability, that may prevent them from being suspended or expelled. So for the kids that you're working with, that might be something that's outside of your direct area of expertise, but I'm going to guess that that you're working with a number of people with expertise in different disciplines, so that if you can get them tested, a neuropsych report that shows that they have the FAS, that shows that they have learning disabilities, that shows that they have anything that can qualify them for an IEP, I think that they will have a greater chance of being able to stay in school, not be disrupted, and a greater chance for success in society. And as you know, if they do have school discipline issues and they get suspended or expelled, they're much more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system and then into the criminal justice system. They are victims and offenders. They, because they're trusting and because of this disability, maybe not so able to process if somebody is good for them or not. They can be a victim. They can also be offenders because they just can't process whether they really should, or it may be an impulsive thing, or they may decide that that they should do something that somebody has asked them to do, even though it's a criminal act, because they want that other person to like them. In the course of all of this studying and meeting people who work with people with fetal alcohol syndrome, I met Billy Edwards, who is an absolutely fabulous advocate. He's a public defender in Los Angeles County, does a lot of work with defending people with FAS across the country, collaborating with public defenders and lawyers across the country on this, and doing presentations. And so, he recounts clients who have done things that are clearly criminal offenses, but it's because they were told to do it and they decided to go along. Getting disability services for fetal alcohol syndrome, I think that now that it is part of the DSM-IV, it may be easier. And I know that there's not just the diagnosis, but then also whether it qualifies as a disability under a particular state's law for obtaining disability services. I don't know the intricacies of that, but to the extent that you're able to access any of those services and funds for your clients, I think that would help them. Child welfare and guardianship. If the birth mother is drinking, you might have an unstable home for a birth, an unstable home in the family of origin. So the child may be in contact with the child welfare system later on, or if once they become emancipated, once they age out, but on an ongoing basis, depending upon the level to which they're affected and are able to manage their own affairs, they may need to have a guardian to protect their assets so that they are not victimized by people who are trying to get those assets and shouldn't. And really, it does take a team. Lawyers, advocates, and investigators. That's if you are dealing with the justice system on whichever level. The neuropsychs, neurologists, psychiatrists for a forensic diagnosis or clinical, looking back, looking forward, trying to get the diagnosis so that anybody that you're dealing with in the system can maybe then understand that you're dealing with somebody who has brain damage, that their behaviors aren't willful, that this is brain damage. And it's not just low IQ, it's brain damage. Therapists for occupational therapy, for physical therapy, for speech. Sasha came home and she needed physical therapy because she just could not collect herself and figure out where she was in time and space. She needed occupational therapy. She would stuff food in her mouth until she gagged. And so, you know, just learning to function is a big thing. And this will depend upon the age of your particular client. Social workers, CASAs, GALs, depending upon where you are in the court system, you know, for guardianships, for adoption matters, for anything else. MDs, I have to say that I don't know a lot of MDs that recognize this, or I would have had the diagnosis as soon as she came home. So you may have to educate the MDs that you're working with on exactly what's going on here, and then tell them what exactly you need them to do. And an MRI specialist, if you can get an MRI, that's going to show you the brain damage. I don't know in the systems that you're working with whether you have access to that, but that may forestall a requirement to do the forensic investigation and interviewing birth family, things like that. I am not, my button is not moving. To go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so forensic diagnosis. If you don't have the features that will allow you to say definitively that you've got FAS, you may need to do a birth mother interview to the extent birth mother is available. And I would assume that all of you know the interview techniques where it's not did you, but how much did you drink? And what size glass was it when you did drink? And when exactly were you drinking? Dysmorphologists to determine the facial features, any of the other physical characteristics that are different. A neuropsych and a forensic psychologist, again, the neuropsych to determine all of the other areas that the child or person has deficits, and to what degree. And again, the MD with expertise and not just experience, please. I can't advance it. There we go. And who are the birth mothers? So this isn't a low income, low education issue. Many of the birth mothers are the college educated white women, and she might not know that she's pregnant, so has income for social drinking, etc. And it's amazing how many people that I've talked to who have been told, yeah, you can have a drink, in spite of all the advertising that there's no safe amount. There's no safe amount. You can't. So if you're pregnant or plan to get pregnant, no alcohol, please. All right, and then again, the birth mother interview, and this is thank you to Billy Edwards. How many rather than did you? About patterns before you knew you were pregnant. How many were you drinking? Because as we all know, there's a period of time where the woman might not know that she's pregnant, so asking that question can elicit some information. And again, the size of the drinking container, rather than just a drink. These are the different tests that are going to be used in the psych reports, and many of these will be used for the for IEP purposes as well. And I'm sure that everybody is knows about those tests. And again, you know, I can't tell you how many of these that that my children have been through as a result of the special education programming. My presentation was first drafted in 2013, and so there may be more than these or updated reports or tests that are better for things like this now. Okay, so the adaptive behavior, it's the everyday living skills. How do you get things done every day? Cleaning the house. How do you, and again, this is something that Sasha, she's 13 now. She does a pretty good job of it, but every time she does something, so every time she has to, she feeds her cat. Sasha, did you feed Nellie today? Did you put everything away? Did you get it out of the way of the dogs? Did you put it back where it's supposed to go? Did you put the bowl where Nellie can get it? Do you have everything that you need for school? You know, first we're going to get dressed, then we're going to get the backpack ready, then go get your coat and your hat. You know, we go step by step every single day. All right. And again, inhibition, whether I should do this or not. How do I get something done? What are all the supplies that I need in order to have something? How long is it going to take? For Sasha, working memory, once she can get it into her working memory, and it might take 1 to 2 months or longer for a concept to stick. Once it's, oh, I'm sorry, not from working memory. Once it's in her long-term memory, she's got it. Working memory can take a long time to get to the point where she can access it in the moment. So this stuff, a lot of it is really repetition, doing it over and over and over and over. Verbal self-regulation. I can't tell you the outbursts now that we're in school, in a different school, and again, it's a transition. It's very challenging for her to not blurt something out at a teacher because she's feeling a little bit overwhelmed. The motor control for her is pretty good right now. For a younger child, might not quite be there. I know that initially she had some really jerky movements, and that continued for a long time. So maybe you'll see that in some of the population that you're working with. Emotional regulation is very difficult. There are outbursts. Generally, it's outbursts instead of taking a few minutes, taking a breath. Motivation to do more difficult things. You know, we all have that, but for people affected, I think it just goes to extremes. Okay, so socially inappropriate behavior. I've gone through some of those things before. Consequences from past actions. Why can't I have my phone? Well, because you did this, because you were posting on TikTok, I told you not to, because you're on YouTube and I told you not to, over and over and over. And, you know, another 5 minutes. Why can't I have my phone? Concepts of time and money, counting out money, that can be very difficult. How much time is 5, 10 minutes? So a lot of this part is going to be, you know, with the money, it's repetition. With time, it's going back and saying, okay, you know, I told you we had 10 minutes, now it's 5 minutes, now it's 2 minutes, but just in an informative way, so that you don't increase the anxiety. Frequent cues. When she was younger, she'd look to me for social cues, which was good, because we have that kind of trusting relationship. Feedback is really important in the immediate moment. Roller coaster emotions, lack of remorse is a big one, and I do not know how you teach that. You know, you did something, it hurt someone, yeah, I don't care. And I think that they really do care, but they're not going to tell you because it's embarrassing, and they're embarrassed that they did say something. And so for Sasha, she will simply say that I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, until it builds up, and then she has a crying jag, and then she's like, you know, I really didn't want to do that. So that may be something. So the DSM-IV, again, now it's part of the DSM-IV. It used to be neurodevelopmental. I'm really sorry, I don't remember the PIE. But it's a range of disabilities, and I think it's still a range of disabilities. Prenatal alcohol exposure. Previous diagnoses may have been incorrect or incomplete. You may have antisocial personality disorder, ADHD. They may react, perform differently on medication, because again, the brain is affected, and you saw the slide with the brain. ODD, RAD, reactive attachment disorder, conduct disorder, and/or mood disorder. Those may not be exactly what it is. Or it might be that plus fetal alcohol syndrome. So the diagnoses that are part of any prior reports, I think if FAS isn't part of it, that you probably need to take a look at that again and see, are we really dealing with ODD, or is it just part of the behavior associated with FAS because somebody can't, not won't. Okay, and then in the birth records, the head circumference, take a look at that. Underweight, smaller children, small head circumference, failure to thrive, might be FAS. Can't get that one to move. There it goes. Educational records. Again, I don't know the extent to which you have access to these or use access to these, but if they're within your custody in the juvenile justice system, they're going to need special education services as well, likely, and in order for them to be able to exit and then function in the world. So to the extent that you're able to access these records and access additional services for people in your care, I just think that will help them in their future. And not all special education services are equal. but they can't be part of just the general population, so to speak, in the schools. Okay, and then this is more within your purview, probably, taking a look at all of these reports and then seeing if you have, if you can find some commonality. This probably has happened before they get to your services, and would be more for their public defenders. But after the fact, to the extent that you have access to these records, can maybe get an FAS diagnosis. Maybe that will help them when they go back into court with their cases. Okay, books. I cannot recommend more highly Ann Stryska's Fetal Alcohol Syndrome Disorder book. It's comprehensive. I was reviewing my book just a few minutes ago. It's easy to read, and I consider her the premier researcher in the United States on this. She's, I think, since deceased. I know that when I met her, she was at the stages of dementia, but she has done so much in this realm, and she's got 2 books here, Secondary Challenges as well as the FASD. Liz Culp is a person who lives with fetal alcohol syndrome. She wrote a book with her mother, The Best I Can Be. So you're going to get a first person viewpoint on what it's like to live with fetal alcohol syndrome. Michael Doris adopted a child with fetal alcohol syndrome who was so affected and so impulsive, walked out in front of traffic without looking both ways, and was killed. And then there's the fantastic Antone series. There's 2 or 3 books on that, and it follows a boy named Antone, and he was asked, so what does FAS stand for? And he says, fantastic, Antone succeeds. I really like that. Okay, the ABA Center on Children and the Law has had a site on FAS. The CDC has an FAS site, nofas.org. mofas.org has a tremendous set of resources on their website. If you look on YouTube and look up Kenneth Lyons Jones on the history of fetal alcohol syndrome, I think that's extraordinarily informative. I'm sorry to say that I haven't looked at davidbolding.com in a while, but he was somebody who worked with people in living with fetal alcohol syndrome in the justice system. And that's it.
All right, at this time, I'm going to ask Jennifer and Heidi to chime in, maybe from a juvenile justice perspective. Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Absolutely, thank you. You can go ahead.
Why I found this so interesting is because given our youth's history, it wouldn't surprise me that a number of our youth have maybe had this syndrome. I know a while back, about 10, well, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, a really good medical doctor, Carl Bell, who has since passed away, had offered to do a study with GJJ to see just how many youth actually have this. I would have loved to have done that. It was a different administration yet then. I know if Heidi had been in then, we probably would have had completed that study. But given our youth's history, I wouldn't find it surprising that many of our youth may actually have this diagnosis. Although the symptoms can overlap with other disorders, it's important to pay attention to what the symptoms are and if our youth are exhibiting these. I can probably say I have not seen this diagnosis come through too often in our agency. And yet I think if we were more informed on it, it probably would. In any event, some of the interactions that Janet talked about can really be effective and apply to our youth. And it's important to pay attention to those too.
Yeah, I was jumping in. I just was struck by some of the interventions and some of the techniques that Janet mentioned. I think actually, like you said, can be very effective in general for our youth. I agree. I think it would be, I would love to sort of get a better sense of how much this actually is impacting our kids. And it also strikes me that some of the symptoms, particularly sort of changes in brain function, changes in brain size and shape, actually seem to me to be fairly consistent with changes that you see in kids who have exposure to a lot of trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, even, you know, kids who neglect, kids who aren't, you know, are exposed to in vitro or in utero trauma, but then also, like, you know, as young children at birth to age 3, exposure to trauma post-birth actually does some of the same things to the brain that fetal alcohol syndrome does.
That's correct.
It was very striking. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a double whammy for some kids.
Yeah.
You know, I think that if you, the biggest thing is that if you have a child in the system who, you know, is not acting as you would expect for somebody their age, one, suspect FAS, and two, I think the most helpful thing is, you know, to remember not can't and not won't, can't, and to adjust your own expectations then. And I think that that's probably the one thing that has been most effective in helping my daughter kind of move forward and develop and become the person that she can be.
One of the things I was thinking of too, as I'm looking at this, is we just developed a new mental health intake screening form, which it's always in transition. There's always things we're going to add. And one of the things I thought, well, we ask the kids a lot about their substance abuse, but we don't ask if they know anything about if their parents have had substance abuse. And I think that might be beneficial to ask on there as well. I think it might be. Then I also thought, could we check for the physical symptoms? But I think that might be kind of hard to do. But it's something in my brain now that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
One of the questions I see is, why is it important to have close collaboration between education, health, and mental health teams? It's important to have collaboration between all those all the time, no matter what type of youth you're looking at. But I could see where it would be just as, you know, important in here, because you're getting information from education that may impact education and health, that may impact the mental health systems, and vice versa. So that way, it would be important to get that information. If you don't share that, you might not know what you're working with.
Exactly. And I think that, you know, accessing the special ed system, and again, to the extent that that's something that you're able to advocate for in your particular position, is going to be, it could be a determining factor whether they succeed in life, honestly. I mean, it's just like, you know, the school to prison pipeline. You take a kid out of school, and you know, the chances that they do not succeed and recommit are so much higher. And I think that this population generally is just so vulnerable right from the get-go.
So what I think this impact, what I'm walking away from this is that maybe like I'm already thinking, do I contact our, well, first of all, my mental health department and find out what do you all know about fetal alcohol syndrome?
Mm-hmm.
Are you assessing for this? Also to ask maybe our psychiatric department, just what, what their thoughts on this are and how they feel about that, but also to maybe contact our special ed department and say, find out where they're at on it. Do we need more education regarding this?
Right. Yeah, and my contact information is there. It's my personal cell phone, my personal email account, and so anybody on the webinar, I have been able to build a network of nationally recognized experts, and I'm happy to share contact information, and everybody is happy to share their expertise on this. It's a really passionate group, and so if anybody wants to contact me or go through, I guess Jennifer, whichever way works best for you, I'm happy to continue to be involved in the conversation. My daughter's okay, because she's got a stable home. She's got people advocating for her who understand what's going on. But there's a lot of other kids who don't necessarily, and I just think that that's a tragedy.
Can I ask how often, like maybe after school or other places do you go? Do you recognize this now and see it? I guess maybe specifically in your school or maybe in other areas that you are in. Do you recognize it and see it as untreated?
So she does have one friend who has a lot of the characteristics, and again, it's a white, wealthy, upper middle class family, and so it would not be outside of the range. But tell you, once you get involved with people with disabilities, working with advocates for people with disabilities, you just kind of get this second sense, and it might not be FAS, but something's not quite right. And so, like with FAS, follow your instinct. You know how a typical kid acts, whether it's with your own family, friends, etc. And so you've got this kiddo who is not quite there. Think of FAS, because it's as prevalent as Downs, and so it would not be outside. It would not be an outlier sort of thing to think that it's FAS as opposed to something else.
I'm curious if any of the other folks on the call have any questions or, identify with some of the things that we're talking about here.
Heidi, I have not had any questions come in.
Okay.
I don't know, Heidi, do you notice any of these features in our youth? Do you see that in our population?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I definitely recognize some of these features in our kids, and I was scanning as we're going through the information, scanning in my head, like youth that I know or have known at DJJ. And I actually think in some ways I liked your question, Jennifer, about, whether Janet sees this now that, she's really been involved with it, that she sees it untreated in, her interactions. I think for us, our normal, like the kids we see day to day, most of them have something going on. You know,
Yeah.
most of them have, I think, so sometimes it's like we may miss these sorts of things in our day-to-day interaction because we're sort of used to kids coming to us from really, really challenging circumstances, you know, many times with multiple mental health and, you know, co-occurring substance abuse diagnoses, you know, with multiple compound traumas. And so I think sometimes it can sort of be easy to miss the nuance of kind of what's happening with their behavior. And it just makes me think a little bit about, you know, whether it's this or other things that youth have going on. You know, it can sometimes be difficult to sort of take a step back and say to ourselves, like, this behavior is really driven by something that's going on, you know, organically in his brain, something that's driven by all this past experience and really doesn't have a lot to do with kind of their choice in the moment as much as we sometimes think it does.
The impulsivity and suggestibility, are you talking about?
Yeah, I just think impulsivity, suggestibility, I think, you know, even, you know, you mentioned with your daughter, like sort of having to be really, really mindful of like sort of reminding her and completing one task, giving, you know, right. I think having dysregulation, being really reactive, all that stuff, we see it all the time. And, you know, I think sometimes it can be difficult to take a step back and think there is likely something organic going on here.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
The piece to me that is so many things you described, I see across so many different spectrums of a diagnosis. But what I do see when I look at some of our kids, the physical features. And right. I have for years, wondered about that for years. Because I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Right.
I know, as you were talking, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, and that's such a small percentage of the people who are affected, you know. But yeah, you get those features and you know, you can get the diagnosis.
I'm definitely going to add this piece to our intake screening. I'm not sure what answers I'll get. I can get history. I may or may not get it from the history, but I may get or I may or may not get it from the youth. Like, you know, they could say, like, yeah, my mom's been partying since you know, before I was born, or, you know, and it's just then cues you in and gives you another direction to look into.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies. Charity, I'm going to assume we don't have any more questions.
You are correct. We have no more questions.
Okay.
I just want, Janet, before we end, Janet, is there anything that you really, any key thing that you want to highlight or leave us with, or action that you want to, you know, direct us towards? Yeah.
So I think that the biggest thing that you can remember if you've got somebody who you might think has FAS is that it's not won't, it's can't. And remember that, you know, the older they get, they recognize that they're different. They're going to try to cover things up. And so they're going to, you know, do behaviors that deflect from that can't. You know, so when you're not reactive to the behavior, I think you can have better success in resolving whatever is going on.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you for attending today. And we're going to go ahead and close out this webinar. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.